In this video, I show you how to assemble the RIDINGTON drift kart, so follow along. So we are using the box that it was shipped in just to kind of prop it up there, make it easier to work on. The assembly itself is pretty simple. I like to lay out all my parts so I can see everything that I have. Also, check out the manual. Here's the charger. Here are wheel covers, two of the tools that they include, and the hardware. Tools that you're gonna need: Phillips screwdriver, small adjustable wrench, and a set of needle nose pliers. All right, so underneath the go-kart, there is two bolts that hold the axle in place. You could either use a 10mm wrench socket, or you can use an adjustable wrench and just remove them. They should be pretty loose. So if they're not, you could just use the wrench to back it out a little bit, and you can loosen it up with your fingers. And these just need to be loosened up so you could slide the axle through. So the axle, the steering column, and the front axle is actually all zip tied together in this nice little package. So we're just gonna clip the zip ties, set the steering column aside, and we're gonna be using this axle in the back. Now you can use the included wrench in here to take off these nuts off the end of the axle, just so we could slide it through. And all we're doing is sliding in the axle. Now if your axle is not sliding in easily, make sure you back out these bolts a little bit more. Gonna remove the other nut on the other side. And now we can install our back wheels to center the axle before we tighten those two bolts underneath. So the back wheels are obviously the bigger ones. You have the gear that slides into the gearbox. Now we can install the washer and the nylon nut, and do the same thing on the other side. Now if you don't have the thread sticking out on the other side, just gently push the axle all the way in on the other side. Then you'll have plenty of room to put on the washer and the nylon nut. So the reason why they include two of the same tools is so you can use them at the same time to tighten the wheels onto the axle. So one on one side, one on the other side. Get it nice and snug. Now that we have the axle installed and the wheels, we know that the axle is centered. All we have to do is tighten these axle lock bolts. And again, using a 10mm wrench or an adjustable wrench, get them nice and snug. Make sure not to over tighten them. Next step is installing the front axle / steering arms in the front, making sure that we have this tab on the front. I'm gonna put it underneath the car. And And the steering mechanism just goes right on top here. Locate the hardware. Put the steering bolt through. And do the same thing on the other side. In this bag, you will also find 2 of these washers and 2 of the larger nylon lock nuts. There are other 2 smaller ones. We're gonna be using the larger ones for this. Install the washer underneath and then install the nylon nut. And we're gonna use a Phillips screwdriver on top and a 10mm wrench, or you could use an adjustable wrench. Just tighten this. And we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Now we're moving on to the front wheels, so we're gonna go ahead and remove this lock nut on here. I'm gonna remove the lock nut, the washer, and the plastic spacer. We're not gonna remove this washer, we're just gonna keep that on there, the last washer in there. So here is the front of the wheel, and here is the back of the wheel, and we're gonna install that spacer in here in the back of the wheel. Slide the wheel on, reinstall the washer, and reinstall the lock nut. Go ahead and tighten the lock nut. Just make sure not to over tighten it. You want the wheels to be able to spin freely. What I like to do is I like to tighten it all the way to make sure that the wheel is seated. Obviously it's not gonna spin freely, and then back off the threads about a half a turn so the wheel can spin freely. Gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Remove the lock nut, remove the washer, and remove the spacer. Install the spacer in the back of the wheel. Install the wheel. Install the washer. And the lock nut. Tighten it all the way. Make sure the wheel is seated and back off the threads about a half a turn. That should let your wheel spin freely. Next up, we're gonna install the steering column. We're gonna line up this hole with this one on the bottom here. We're gonna be using one of these bolts, and we're gonna be using the shorter one here and the smaller lock nut. And install the little lock nut on the other side. Now to tighten this, you can use an adjustable wrench or an 8mm socket wrench. Next up, we're gonna install the steering shaft. Now, make sure to keep this washer on here. Slide it in through this hole and into the steering column. And the bottom part, this hook needs to go into the steering mechanism just like this. When it's done, it should look something like this. Next, we're installing our steering wheel. Gonna go ahead and put it on that shaft. Make sure to line up those holes. There's a hole in the shaft as well. Use the longer bolt that came with the hardware. You may need something like needle nose pliers just to kind of hold that bolt in there, and on the left side is where the nut should go, because it has an indentation in there for that nut. So when you tighten it from the other side, keep it in place in there. Get it nice and snug, don't over tighten it, and test out your steering. So the next piece that goes on there is this front cowl. So the easiest way to install this is slide it onto the steering column here. And just clip it into the bottom. We're gonna use 2 of the included screws and install the screws underneath here to keep that in place. There's 1 on each side. So before we install the seat, we do need to hook up the battery to the cart. And we're gonna remove these 2 screws over here. 1 on this side, 1 on this side. This panel should pop open and slide out. Inside here, locate 1 red plug with the other one, and just go ahead and clip them together. Press the power button just to test it. Wheels are spinning. Gonna reinstall this panel. All right, we're gonna go ahead and install the seat. And the rest of the hardware that was included. Screws go in right through the seat here. Make sure the seat is seated properly. Next step is remove the screw from the steering wheel and the cover so we can install 4 AA batteries. So you have a horn and some preloaded music on there. Reinstall the cover. Last step is to install these wheel caps, and all you're doing is lining up the tabs into the holes, and they just clip in. Last and final step is to make sure you charge it up fully before you use it for the first time. The charging port is right here. Plug that into the wall, and you will also have a charge indicator right here. Red is charging, green is already done. If you have other ride-on toys that are running on 12 volts, make sure that you somehow mark this charger so you don't plug this into other ride-on toys, and only use this specific charger with a go-kart.